France is panicking. And this time, it's not just political noise. For decades, critics have argued that France's real power didn't end with colonialism. It simply changed form. One of the most striking admissions came from former French President François Mitterrand, who once suggested that without Africa, France would struggle to remain a major global power in the 21st century. Now that warning feels prophetic. 3 African nations have officially begun cutting strategic ties with Paris. Their objective: dismantle the financial architecture that has bound them to France for over 80 years. At the center of it all is the CFA Franc, a currency historically guaranteed and heavily influenced by the French Treasury. But this is no small reform. It's a bold financial rebellion. These countries are building a new regional bank designed to replace the CFA system entirely. Even more explosive, discussions are underway about launching a new currency potentially backed by physical gold, a move that would directly challenge not just France, but the dominance of the US dollar itself. And that's where the tension escalates. US President Donald Trump has previously warned that any serious attempt to dethrone the dollar as the world's reserve currency would come at a steep cost.
We're going to keep it that way, okay? And if we lost the world standard dollar, that would be like losing a war, a major world war. I'm just saying, if people want to challenge it, they can, but they're going to have to pay a big price. And I don't think any of them are willing to pay that price.
In his words, losing the dollar's global dominance would be comparable to losing a major world war. The message was clear: challenge the system, and there will be consequences. Yet across Africa, something is shifting. Movements for monetary sovereignty are growing louder. Leaders and citizens alike are asking uncomfortable questions. Why is the US dollar used in trade between African nations like Djibouti and Kenya? Why must African economies route transactions through foreign financial systems for trade conducted entirely within the continent? For 14 African countries, the CFA franc has meant that foreign oversight touches nearly every financial decision, from loans to reserves. Critics argue it has functioned like a silent drain on sovereignty, with a portion of reserves historically held in France. Imagine believing you control your own economy, only to realize key levers are managed thousands of miles away. Would any nation accept that indefinitely? A senior European official once warned that if France were to lose its deep financial ties in Africa, its global economic ranking could fall significantly. That's because France maintains strong economic influence in multiple African states where the CFA franc circulates, influence that reinforces its global standing. But change is no longer theoretical. Led by Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, the alliance of Sahel states is taking concrete steps toward financial independence. They've launched a sovereign investment and development bank backed by nearly $1 billion in initial capital, a foundation for what they describe as endogenous development. Their vision is ambitious: finance infrastructure, energy, agriculture, industrialization, and technological innovation without relying on Western-dominated financial institutions. When Burkina Faso's leader Ibrahim Traoré was asked whether they intended to confront the CFA franc directly, his response was uncompromising. The currency, he implied, is only one part of a broader system that keeps nations economically dependent. And that system, he suggested, will be dismantled piece by piece. This isn't just about money. It's about power. If successful, this initiative could reshape West Africa's financial landscape, possibly even introducing a new regional currency designed to break free from both the CFA franc and indirect reliance on the euro and dollar systems. But the risks are enormous. Sanctions, diplomatic pressure, capital flight, and geopolitical pushback are all real possibilities. Challenging entrenched global financial structures has never been easy, and history shows that monetary revolutions rarely unfold without resistance. Still, momentum is building. What we're witnessing may be the early stages of a major realignment, one where African nations seek to control their reserves, determine their exchange policies, and trade on their own terms. The question is no longer whether the status quo is being challenged. The real question is, can this financial revolution survive the pressure that will inevitably follow? And if it does, could it mark the beginning of a new economic era, not just for the Sahel, but for the entire continent? According to Ibrahim Traoré, the choice is simple: total independence or nothing at all. In his view, a nation must first rely on its own strength. If it cannot withstand pressure and rise after hardship, then it has surrendered its dignity. But before we go any further, there's something critical we need to confront. This path has been walked before, and it ended in blood. In 1963, Sylvanus Olympio, the first president of Togo, prepared to launch a national currency. His goal was clear: break away from the CFA Franc system and reclaim monetary sovereignty. It was a bold, historic move. 3 days before the official announcement, he was assassinated. The message sent across Africa was unmistakable: challenge the financial order, and you may not survive the consequences. So now the question hangs in the air. Is Traoré leading the alliance of Sahel states toward genuine economic liberation, or toward the same fate that silenced Olympio? Are Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger building a foundation for lasting wealth, or stepping into a trap carefully laid decades ago? Because this new Sahel Investment Bank is not just a financial institution. It represents an attempt to rewrite the rules of power. And the truth behind it is far more complex than simply replacing one currency with another. Can African nations realistically build a system they control 100%, free from Western monetary oversight? That's what we're about to unpack. But to understand how radical this move truly is, we need to rewind to 1945. World War II had just ended. France was shattered. Its economy was in ruins after occupation by Nazi Germany. Paris had suffered. Industry was crippled. Its global influence was fading fast. French leaders faced a brutal reality. Without access to external wealth, their country risked sliding into irrelevance. Under Charles de Gaulle, a strategy emerged. Political independence for African colonies might eventually become unavoidable, but economic independence, that could never be allowed. So a system was designed. It would look like freedom on paper: flags, national anthems, presidents. But behind the scenes, financial control would remain firmly anchored in Paris. That system became known as Françafrique. At the center of it stood the CFA Franc. Today, the CFA framework still connects 14 African countries into 2 monetary unions. In West Africa, Benin, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. In Central Africa, Cameroon, the Central African Republic, Chad, Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, and Gabon. For decades, the arrangement required member states to deposit a significant portion of their foreign reserves with the French Treasury. Historically, that figure stood at 50%, with additional requirements tied to monetary guarantees. While reforms have been introduced in recent years, critics argue the structure still limits full monetary autonomy. Now imagine how this plays out in real life. A gold miner in Mali extracts resources from his own land. The shipment is sold abroad, perhaps to a European buyer. Payment flows through international banking systems. Reserves are converted and managed under frameworks influenced by foreign oversight. On paper, the nation is sovereign. In practice, major levers of monetary control operate outside its borders. For supporters of the Sahel Alliance, this is not simply about economics. It is about reclaiming agency, deciding interest rates, managing reserves, financing infrastructure, and backing development without needing approval from former colonial powers or Western financial institutions. That's why the creation of a new regional investment bank matters. It signals a shift toward endogenous development, funding roads, energy, agriculture, and industry through their own pooled capital. But history whispers a warning. Financial revolutions are never just financial, they are geopolitical. Olympio's fate remains a reminder that challenging entrenched systems carries enormous risk. Today's global environment is even more complex. Sanctions, trade restrictions, currency pressures, diplomatic isolation. So here we are again. Will this generation succeed where others failed? Can Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger transform bold rhetoric into sustainable institutions? Or will external pressure fracture the project before it matures? The battlefield this time isn't fought with tanks. It's fought with reserves, exchange rates, trade routes, and political alliances. And the outcome could redefine not only the Sahel, but Africa's financial future. So what do you think? Is this the dawn of real sovereignty, or history repeating itself under a different name? Half of that gold never truly reaches Bamako. A large portion ends up recorded in accounts tied to the French Treasury. And to maintain that grip, France locked the exchange rate at levels it determined. Before 1994, the peg stood at 1 French franc to 50 CFA francs. Then, in a single overnight decision, without meaningful consultation with African leaders, France devalued the CFA by 50%. Just like that, 100 CFA francs equaled 1 French franc. Imagine going to bed with your savings intact and waking up to discover they've lost half their value. National budgets were slashed overnight. The cost of food, fuel, and medicine doubled. Families who had no say in the decision bore the consequences. It wasn't a market crash. It wasn't a war. It was a monetary decision made thousands of miles away in Paris. When France later adopted the euro, the CFA was pegged to the European currency at a fixed rate. On the surface, stability sounds positive. But critics argue this arrangement effectively caps growth. Why? Because the CFA remains relatively strong to mirror the Eurozone's powerful economy. That strength makes imports cheaper, meaning European goods easily dominate African markets. At the same time, local exports become more expensive and less competitive globally. The result? Domestic agriculture and manufacturing struggle, while foreign products flood the shelves. For many analysts, this structure discourages industrialization and reinforces dependency. History also shows that attempts to break away have come with serious consequences. In 1958 to 1959, Ahmed Sékou Touré, leader of Guinea, rejected continued French control and declared that his people preferred poverty and freedom to riches in slavery. It was a defining moment. France withdrew abruptly. Diplomatic ties fractured. Infrastructure support ended. Guinea faced severe economic isolation in its early years of independence. While accounts differ regarding the extent of covert economic sabotage, what is undisputed is that Guinea endured immense hardship after choosing monetary and political separation. The message across the continent was clear. Leaving the French system would not be easy. This long shadow is precisely why the recent moves by the Alliance of Sahel states are seen as both risky and historic. Critics of the CFA framework argue that while some political and business elites benefited through privileged access to contracts and trade networks, large portions of the population saw limited transformation. Capital flight, the movement of wealth out of African economies into offshore accounts, became a recurring problem in multiple countries. For example, studies have estimated significant capital outflows from Ivory Coast between 1970 and 2010. Oil-rich nations like Equatorial Guinea and Republic of the Congo have also faced scrutiny over large offshore financial flows during the 2000s. Across Gabon and Cameroon, similar debates persist. The pattern critics describe is simple. Resources are extracted, wealth flows outward, and domestic development struggles to keep pace. Even development assistance from Paris has often been structured through contracts that favor French firms, meaning funds frequently cycle back to companies based in France. In effect, African nations borrow, and a portion of that borrowed capital returns to the lender through procurement deals. A frequently cited example is Urano, formerly a river. For decades, it extracted uranium from Niger, contributing significantly to France's nuclear energy supply. Yet electricity access inside Niger remained among the lowest globally, with rural access especially limited. The optics were powerful. A country fueling European power grids, while many of its own citizens lacked reliable electricity. In recent years, Niger's military authorities moved to nationalize aspects of the uranium sector, signaling a shift toward greater domestic control. This broader imbalance resurfaced publicly in 2017 during Emmanuel Macron's visit to Burkina Faso. When a student questioned why their university faced chronic electricity shortages, Macron responded that infrastructure management was the responsibility of Burkina Faso's leadership, not France. The exchange became tense and widely circulated online. Then President Rochmark Christian Kabore appeared visibly uncomfortable during the moment, and Macron's later remark, joking that Kabore had stepped out to fix the air conditioning, intensified criticism across African social media. For many young Africans, the clip symbolized a deeper frustration: political independence without full economic control. That's why today's push by the Sahel Alliance isn't just about launching a bank or replacing a currency. It's about rewriting a financial relationship that has shaped the region for nearly 8 decades. But history warns that financial revolutions rarely unfold without resistance. So the real question remains: can the Sahel nations build a system resilient enough to withstand external pressure? Or will structural realities prove harder to break than political speeches? Because this time, the battlefield isn't military, it's monetary. What legitimacy does French influence still claim in Africa today? That question becomes even more uncomfortable when you remember the words of former French President Jacques Chirac, who openly admitted that a significant share of wealth circulating in France has roots in centuries of African exploitation. He didn't whisper it, he said it plainly. Much of the money in French wallets has historical ties to Africa's resources. Not all of it, but enough to make you pause. So when Sonabel, Burkina Faso's national electricity company, long influenced by French technical systems, still struggles to provide consistent power, while raw materials continue flowing outward, the imbalance becomes hard to ignore. At best, the arrangement looks outdated. At worst, it looks deliberately structured. And it's not just Africans raising this issue. In 2019, Luigi Di Maio, then Italy's deputy prime minister, triggered a diplomatic storm when he publicly accused France of exploiting Africa while contributing to the migration crisis in the Mediterranean. He argued that if Africans were risking their lives crossing the sea, Europe needed to confront the root causes, and he directly pointed at France's unfinished colonial footprint. Paris reacted immediately. The Italian ambassador was summoned. Tensions spiked. That response alone showed how sensitive the subject remains. Because you don't need a PhD in economics to see why the CFA system has faced criticism for decades. Many African intellectuals warned about it early on. In 1963, Sylvanus Olympio, the first president of Togo, prepared to launch a national currency and withdraw from the CFA framework. He understood the danger, but he believed sovereignty required monetary control. 3 days before the announcement, he was assassinated. The soldier who led the coup, Gnassingbé Eyadema, had previously served in the French Foreign Legion and later ruled Togo for nearly 4 decades. Across the region, similar patterns emerged. Leaders who pushed for monetary independence often faced coups, exile, or sudden political collapse. In Mali and Niger, reformist ambitions repeatedly ran into resistance. Since the 1960s, France has conducted dozens of military interventions in Africa. Officially, they were security operations. Critics call them empire maintenance. The message was subtle but firm. You can raise your flag. You can sing your anthem. You can sit at the United Nations. But don't touch the monetary system. Then came a turning point. In December 2025, the Alliance of Sahel States, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, officially operationalized their joint development institution, the Confederation of Sahel States Investment and Development Bank, BCIDAES. Instead of waiting for Western approval or conditional IMF programs, they built their own financial engine. Backed with roughly $900 million in starting capital, the bank is designed to fund regional infrastructure without external veto power. For these governments, this isn't just about money, it's leverage. Because major projects across the Sahel have historically stalled under strict loan conditions from institutions like the International Monetary Fund. Structural reforms, austerity measures, currency constraints, the checklist has often slowed large-scale development. A sovereign investment bank changes the equation. It opens the door for projects like regional rail corridors, highway expansions, energy plants, and industrial zones to move forward without external approval stamps. Whether it's large-scale energy infrastructure, airport modernization, or cross-border transport networks, the goal is clear. Finance development internally, retain strategic control, and reduce dependency. But here's the bigger question. Can financial sovereignty survive geopolitical pressure? Because history shows that monetary independence in Africa has rarely been met with applause. It has often been met with resistance. And this time, the stakes are even higher. The Sahel Alliance isn't just adjusting a policy. It's attempting to redesign the financial architecture of an entire region. If it works, it could redefine Africa's economic future. If it fails, it may reinforce the very system it seeks to replace. Either way, one thing is certain. The era of silent compliance is over. If you've been following this channel, you already know. I've broken down each of those mega projects in detail. So after this video, go check the deep dives. Because what they're building is massive. But here's the part most people are missing. It's not just what they're building. It's how they're paying for it. Instead of running to foreign lenders or signing another IMF agreement, the Alliance of Sahel States is funding its new bank from the inside. Each member country is committing 5% of its national tax revenue directly into the Joint Development Fund. That's not symbolic. That's structural. It's a deliberate break from the old cycle of dependency. No more conditional loans, no more policy strings attached, no more development plans written in distant boardrooms. They're betting on something radical in today's world. That they can grow using their own resources and partner with nations that respect that independence. That's why you see outreach to BRICS, deeper conversations with China, and engagement with African sovereign funds. The idea is simple: collaborate, but don't surrender control. For decades, institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank shaped development policy across Africa. Now the AES bloc is signaling that it wants a different blueprint. Not development dictated from Washington or Paris. Development dictated by Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey. For the first time in modern history, these nations are pooling money not to purchase foreign bonds, but to finance their own survival and expansion. And according to insider reports, the bank is built on 3 pillars that unsettle the old financial order. First, a push toward asset-backed value, anchoring future currency mechanisms to tangible African resources like gold and strategic minerals. Second, total investment sovereignty. No external approval required to build a railway, a power plant, or a refinery. Third, eliminating unnecessary middlemen, expanding trade in local currencies to avoid constant dollar conversion fees paid to Western banking systems. It sounds technical, but it's actually simple. Stop the outflow. Keep the value at home. This idea isn't isolated. It connects to wider continental efforts. The African Continental Free Trade Area, launched in 2019, aims to increase intra-African trade dramatically. But trade without payment reform only goes so far. That's why in 2022, African leaders introduced the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, designed to allow African businesses to transact directly in local currencies, cutting out the dollar for regional trade. Analysts estimate it could save the continent up to $5 billion annually in transaction costs. In East Africa, digital payment ecosystems are already expanding cross-border transactions in local currencies. Across the continent, a question keeps growing louder. Why are African countries using foreign currencies to trade with each other? Recently, William Ruto asked it plainly. Why should traders in Djibouti and Kenya scramble for US dollars to trade goods that never touch American soil? His argument wasn't anti-dollar. It was pro-logic. Use dollars for US trade. Use African currencies for African trade. Even the broader BRICS bloc has intensified discussions around trading in national currencies instead of relying solely on the greenback. The global financial system is shifting. So the real question becomes, if Asia is diversifying, if Latin America is exploring alternatives, if BRICS is experimenting with currency swaps, why shouldn't Africa? That's the vision driving Ibrahim Traoré and the Sahel Alliance. And here's where the narrative becomes personal. Traoré doesn't project the typical image of a post-colonial strongman chasing luxury abroad. He doesn't broadcast Riviera vacations or Paris shopping trips. He appears in fatigues. He speaks directly. He moves with the posture of someone who believes the fight is structural, not symbolic. Whether one agrees with his methods or not, his message is consistent. Sovereignty isn't a speech. It's infrastructure. It's currency. It's control over capital flows. And he understands a blunt reality. Political independence without financial independence is fragile. Now the stakes are enormous. If this experiment works, it could redefine how African states finance development for generations. If it fails, critics will say the old system was unavoidable. Either way, one thing is clear. The debate is no longer quiet, it's no longer academic, and it's no longer confined to policy circles. It's happening in real time, and the outcome could reshape Africa's economic future. You can expel foreign soldiers from your soil. But if someone else still controls your currency, your reserves, and your credit lines, are you really free? That's the gamble Captain Ibrahim Traoré is taking. He knows the history. He knows what happened to leaders like Sankara. He knows how monetary independence has ended before. But in his view, the alternative isn't stability. It's a slow, silent suffocation under debt and dependency. To his people, the message has been blunt. The road ahead will hurt. Sanctions may bite. Trade pressure may rise. But freedom isn't financed through interest payments to foreign treasuries. It's earned through sacrifice. Critics say this is reckless. $1 billion experiment in a $1 trillion global system. They argue that France already reformed the CFA structure in 2021, rebranding parts of it as the ECO, and that Paris will always find a way to maintain influence, whether through exchange rate pegs or polished diplomacy. But here's what's different now. The AES Investment Bank is no longer an idea. It's operational. For the first time in modern Sahel history, the vault, at least structurally, belongs to them. The real question isn't whether they can design their own financial architecture. It's whether global power centers will tolerate it. Because monetary sovereignty doesn't just shift balance sheets, it shifts power. So now we're watching something bigger than a regional banking reform. We're watching a test of whether an African bloc can redraw its economic destiny and hold that line under pressure. Is this the birth of a new financial chapter for the continent? Or are we witnessing a bold move that history has already warned us about? Let me know what you think in the comments.